"That is not my name," Millicent said, pinning the blue ribbon beneath one gloved finger and stopping Quentin's pen before it touched the marriage articles. Beyond the open double doors, Norton, Duke of Crestwood, stood in the cream and gold drawing room in a black, formal coat, while both families watched, the quiet sister expected to replace the bride who had fled at dawn. Quentin warned that if she delayed the carriage to St. George's by 10 more minutes, the fund supporting her younger brother would be withdrawn, but Norton crossed the threshold and said, "No one signs a letter until Miss Montague has read every line." Millicent read the name written for the bride, her sister's name. The jointure depended upon an heir. The new Duchess was ordered into the late Duchess's rooms. Quentin retained power over her brother's allowance. The name is wrong. The jointure is wrong. The trust is wrong. Quentin reached for the page. Norton held it flat with 2 fingers. "What terms would make it yours? The fund is settled to my separate use. My brother's allowance remains secure. I choose my rooms and may leave after 1 season with the trust intact." She met his eyes. "And I sign as Millicent Montague." Norton turned to the solicitor. "A new sheet. Write faster." The room obeyed. Millicent read the altered clauses, added 1 season, signed her name, and tied the blue ribbon around the settlement herself. Less than an hour later, they stood at St. George's, Hanover Square, under the special license. The vows were spoken. Norton offered his arm without closing the space in which she might refuse it. She accepted. By the time they returned to Crestwood House the last winter, light still shone through the high windows, but candles had been lit, and the wedding supper had formally begun. The cream and gold drawing room glowed beneath the chandelier. Millicent entered in her ivory gown with a folded fan in one hand. Norton walked beside her in black. 4 older relations stood behind them, rigid with shock. Quentin raised a glass. "The duty intended for Miss Brandon has been fulfilled by." Norton took Millicent's hand. "Stop. I have never courted a woman," he said. "My first marriage was arranged for the convenience of this house. I know how easily duty can occupy every room and leave no place for choice. I will not permit a second arrangement to erase the woman who entered it." His grasp remained firm, without drawing her nearer. "My wife's name is Millicent. She is not her sister's substitute. She owes this estate no heir as the price of her security, and she owes me no door to her bedchamber. Anyone who cannot honor her name and her terms will not be received at Crestwood." No fan moved. The candles hissed once in the stillness. At the opening of their wedding night, his confession had silenced the house. The silence that followed was not the silence Millicent knew from being overlooked. This one had been made for her. Quentin lowered his glass. An aunt in gold silk looked from Millicent's ink-marked glove to the Duke's hand around it, and found no correction she dared offer. Millicent noticed that Norton did not tighten his hold when the room stared. He kept it steady until she shifted her fingers. Then he released her at once. His declaration had secured the first public moment. It had not yet proved that the doors, servants' records, and daily habits of Crestwood would obey the same rule. Millicent had expected to fight for every inch of her name. She had not expected the master of Crestwood to make the whole room hear it. At Norton's signal, the butler brought a silver tray bearing 3 brass keys. "The master apartments remain closed," Norton said. "The suite prepared for your sister will be cleared and will not be offered to you." These keys belong to 3 other suites. None was prepared for either woman. Inspect all 3 and choose none if they do not suit you. Millicent looked at the keys. Gratitude would have made the choice feel like a favor. She answered as though they were discussing a matter already recognized as hers. "The West Suite overlooks the Winter Garden." "It does. It was prepared for no one else, no one." She lifted that key from the tray. "Then the West Suite is mine." Norton inclined his head. "The West Suite is yours." By the end of the first week, the habits of the townhouse had begun to alter. Place cards, account books, and the household register now bore Millicent's name. Her brother's letters came unopened to the West Suite. The housekeeper asked her where linen should be stored, instead of glancing toward the closed apartments of a dead mistress. Millicent changed little at first. She preferred to know the shape of a room before moving its furniture. She learned which footman hurried when nervous, which maid hid pins beneath her cuff, and which corridor made every servant lower a voice that had not been loud to begin with. That corridor led to the memorial room. The door stood unlocked. Inside, velvet curtains shut out the afternoon, and a silver brush set lay straight upon a dressing table. A mourning book rested beneath a miniature portrait. Nothing appeared to have moved in 3 years. Norton came along the passage and stopped outside, rather than entering beside her. "It is not a test," he said. "You need not maintain it. You need not use it. It exists, but it has no claim upon your rooms." Millicent watched a housemaid approach with folded linen, see them at the threshold, and turn away without asking where the linen belonged. "The room may have no claim," she said, "but its silence does. The servants are afraid to drop a basket near this door. They ask me a question, then look here for the answer." Norton's attention moved to the retreating maid. He had issued a clear command that no one trouble the new Duchess. Only now did he seem to see that the command had taught the staff to avoid her. "What must change? I do not want these apartments. I want the writing desk in the corner. It blocks the best light and is large enough for the household accounts." He examined the oak desk, a massive, claw-footed thing that looked rooted to the carpet. "It is extremely heavy. Most things are until someone decides where they belong." 4 footmen carried it to the West Suite that afternoon. Norton directed the turn at the stair landing with clipped instructions. The desk reached Millicent's sitting room, where she asked for it beneath the western window. It was placed too far to the left. "The afternoon glare will strike the paper," she said. Norton looked at the light, then at the desk. "Move it 6 inches." The footman obeyed. 3, Millicent corrected. He regarded her. "You allowed me to be wrong by 3 inches. I wished to know whether your grace could survive it." One of the footmen coughed into his sleeve. Norton ordered the desk moved back 3 inches and dismissed the men before the cough became laughter. Millicent laid bare fingertips on the sun-warmed wood. "It appears the desk has surrendered." "The desk has exhausted my patience," he said. "That is not the same thing." Yet the next morning her name appeared above his on the household account book, because those accounts concerned the rooms she governed. He offered no speech with the alteration. He simply left the book open on the desk where she would see it. Weeks 2 through 5 acquired a rhythm neither of them had planned. They did not share a bed, but they began to share breakfast in the small west dining room because the formal table made every cup of chocolate feel like a state occasion. Norton arrived at 8 precisely. Millicent arrived when she had finished reading her brother's letters. After 3 mornings, he moved the breakfast hour to 8:15 and never mentioned why. Once he ordered the table laid for 6, because 6 chairs made the room properly balanced, though only Millicent, Norton, and one of his older aunts were expected. She removed 3 place settings before he arrived. "Where are the remaining chairs?" he asked. "Elsewhere being empty without misleading anyone." "An empty chair is not misleading. In this house, your grace, an empty chair may govern an entire dinner." He looked toward the doorway of the memorial corridor, understood the reference, and ordered the table reset for 3. His aunt concealed her satisfaction by studying the soup. He still gave orders too quickly. She still waited until the error revealed itself. The winter garden became their most frequent field of dispute. Norton wanted symmetry. Millicent wanted every living thing to survive his symmetry. He ordered a potted orange tree placed at the center of the glass-domed room. The head gardener moved it before breakfast. By afternoon, its leaves had begun to curl away from the cold shadow cast by the eastern stonework. "The soil is poor," Norton said the following day. "The soil is excellent." Millicent turned a page of her book. "The position is poor. The center receives light from every side. Not in January." He called for the gardener. Millicent closed her book before the man could be blamed. "The southeast corner catches the dawn," she said. "The center catches your Grace's preference for straight lines." The gardener fixed his eyes on the floor. Norton studied the pale track of sunlight across the stone. Then he removed his coat, gripped the rim of the terracotta pot, and dragged the tree toward the southeast corner himself. Soil streaked his waistcoat. The pot made a noise severe enough to bring 2 servants to the door. Millicent waited until he had centered it within the light. "You might have permitted assistance. I issued the wrong order. I prefer to correct my own smaller errors. And the larger ones," his eyes met hers, "those require witnesses." The answer was so dry and so entirely serious that a laugh escaped her before she could contain it. Norton went still. For one disordered second, he seemed to have forgotten whatever command came next. Then he looked down at the earth on his waistcoat. "The tree is alive," he said. "My dignity may recover. It will require better light." The 2 servants at the door fled before their amusement became audible. Later that week, Millicent found the serving bell moved to the left side of her reading chair. She usually held a book in her right hand and had once reached awkwardly across it to ring. Norton had noticed, or the staff had reported it, and the bell had changed places without comment. That small correction troubled her more pleasantly than Flowers would have done. Flowers expected admiration. The bell merely made her life easier and asked nothing in return. She began to distinguish 2 kinds of quiet, the quiet in which she had once been overlooked, and the quiet of a room where no one required her to disappear. Then Quentin's letters began arriving about the anniversary of the late Duchess's death. The Crestwood relations expected the memorial dinner to be held exactly as it had been held for 3 years. Norton read the requests as obligations. Millicent read them as instructions that the present household should arrange itself around an absence. He signed the order before speaking to her. On the Tuesday before the memorial, Millicent returned from a walk to find the small west dining room locked. Footmen carried her preferred silver toward the vaults. The bowl of winter roses she had placed on the sideboard was gone. Quentin and 2 older relations had arrived early to inspect the preparations and were speaking in the adjoining salon. "Where are those pieces going?" she asked. "To storage, Your Grace," a footman said. "His Grace has ordered the great dining room opened. The former seating plan is to be restored for tomorrow." Millicent crossed the hall without removing her gloves. The great dining room had been laid for 40. An empty chair stood at the head of the table beneath the late Duchess's portrait. Quentin's card was placed near it. The older aunts had their accustomed positions. Millicent found her own card at a small secondary table near the hearth between 2 distant relations. She touched the card once. The ink was fresh. Norton entered with several sealed letters in his hand. "The family arrives at noon. I shall attend the chapel service in the morning, and the dinner will conclude by 10. Millicent looked at the long table, then at the key to the west suite hanging from her reticule. The key still opened her rooms. It had not opened the locked dining room, where she had begun to think of breakfast as theirs. "I see the arrangements are complete," she said. "It is one evening." Norton glanced at the card beneath her fingers. Afterward, the house returns to its usual order. "A guest is also given a room, Your Grace." She placed her card on the silver salver at the center of the table. "A guest is fed and permitted to walk the halls. That does not make the house hers." He said nothing. "You told the family I was not a substitute. Today you removed my name from the table so that nothing would appear to have changed. You did not ask me to remember the dead. You ordered me to vanish for them." Norton looked from the card to the locked doors of the west dining room. The papers in his hand bore his seal. He had meant to preserve honor by allowing one old ceremony to stand untouched. He had instead made every servant repeat the same judgment. Millicent had stopped at the marriage table. Another woman's place mattered more than hers. He pulled the bell cord. The steward arrived, followed by the housekeeper and 2 footmen. "Clear this table," Norton said. "Open the west dining room. Return every piece moved from it." The steward hesitated. "The guests." "Your Grace, there will be no memorial dinner in this form. I shall attend the chapel service. The family may attend with me, or remain away. Send notice under my seal." He turned so that the servants and the relations already waiting in the adjoining salon could hear him. "The order was mine. It made the Duchess a guest in her own house. The order is withdrawn. From this day, no household observance involving her rooms, her table, or her name is to be arranged without her decision." Quentin appeared in the salon doorway. "Crestwood, you cannot cast aside 3 years of duty because she dislikes a place card." Norton did not look at him. "I am correcting an order because I understand what it did. The family will call this disloyalty. Then they may call it from outside my doors." The footman began lifting plates. The empty chair at the head of the table was carried away first. Before evening, 3 answers returned. One relation called the cancellation an insult to the dead. Another threatened never to enter Crestwood again. Norton read each letter at the cleared table and wrote the same reply beneath his seal. The chapel service would proceed, but the living Duchess would not be displaced to satisfy it. He sent the letters without asking Millicent to soften the words or share the blame. Millicent watched the old arrangement come apart. Norton did not ask her to absolve him. He did not speak of grief as though grief excused the use he had made of power. When the servants had gone, he faced her across the half-cleared room. "The west dining room is open. The silver is being returned. No guest will enter it for 3 days unless you invite them. 3 days you have endured enough family instruction for 1 week." The answer almost resembled humor. She did not smile. "Not yet." "The portrait should remain," she said after a moment, "but not above an empty chair." Norton inclined his head. "You will decide where." 3 days later, Millicent moved the miniature portrait from the dark memorial room to a bright table in the upper corridor where it could be seen without commanding silence. She placed the mourning book in the library among the family records. The silver brushes remained where they were. The ceremonial chair that had stood beneath the portrait was sent to an unused bedchamber. She was not destroying the past. She was deciding its proper size. At 5 minutes before 7, she set a handwritten card on a salver. "West dining room, 7 o'clock. No other guests." Norton arrived at the hour alone. He wore a dark coat and a plain white cravat. No secretary followed with correspondence. No footman carried a portfolio. He stopped at the threshold until Millicent indicated the chair opposite hers. "I want one room that was prepared for no one else," she said. "Tonight I want you in it." He crossed the threshold and sat where she had directed. Dinner began with more attention than conversation. Rain tapped against the winter garden glass. A coal shifted in the grate. Norton poured wine for her only after she turned her glass upright, and the small restraint made the air between them feel less guarded than any declaration might have done. "You did not invite the family," he observed. "They would require a seating plan. I have seen what you do to seating plans. They improve under pressure." His mouth altered at one corner. "Like orange trees improve under light. Dukes improve under pressure." This time his laugh was low and brief, but it changed the room. Millicent had never heard it before. She discovered she wanted to hear it again. When the last course had been removed, Norton rested his hand beside his untouched wine glass, said on our wedding day that I had never courted a woman. His voice had lost the carrying force he used before a room. "That was not pride. I know how to provide terms, enforce an order, and keep a house from falling into confusion. I do not know how to desire a woman without fearing that I shall turn the desire into another duty she must perform." Millicent did not offer comfort he had not requested. She looked at the chair he had entered only by her invitation. "Then begin with this evening," she said. "Do not make it a right to tomorrow. Do not make it a promise for the whole season. Let an invitation mean what it says." Norton reached across the table and turned her hand palm upward. His thumb rested lightly over the pulse at her wrist. The touch was exact, but not cold. "Tonight," he said. She left her hand in his. The bell in the entrance hall rang before either of them spoke again. A footman brought a sealed note from Quentin. The message was short. The runaway bride had been abandoned in Kent and would return to London within 3 days. Family intended to demand that the first settlement be restored. Millicent read the note twice. Norton did not take it from her. She folded it along its existing crease. "Tomorrow I shall place the current articles in the library. What else? The West Key. The household register. 1 witness from the staff. And where shall I sit at my right? Not at the head." Norton released her hand and rose. "Done." Quentin arrived before noon the following day, carrying a leather portfolio and a letter in the runaway bride's hand. He passed the butler before he could be announced and struck the portfolio down on the hall table. "The mistake can be corrected," he declared. "Miss Brandon is returning. The intended bride is available, and the original settlement must be restored." Millicent came from the library with the brass key enclosed in her palm. The old instinct to withdraw stirred before she could stop it. She could leave at the end of the season. The trust would remain hers. She could spare herself another room in which men discussed where she ought to stand. Norton descended the stairs. His face became still when he saw Quentin's papers. "No member of the Chetwood connection enters this house again," he said. "Steward, do not give that order," Millicent said. Norton stopped before the bell was answered. Quentin smiled as though he had mistaken her interruption for surrender. Millicent looked only at her husband. "If my place here exists because you shut a door, then it exists by your permission. You could open the same door tomorrow. I will not exchange one man's arrangement for another man's protection." Norton's hand fell from the bell cord. For a moment the hall held nothing but the faint rattle of carriage harness outside. "Whom do you admit to counsel?" he asked. "Mr. Chetwood, the solicitor who drew the present articles, the steward and the housekeeper as household witnesses." She turned to Quentin. "Tomorrow at 10. Bring the letter and every paper on which you rely. I demand an answer today. Refuse me, and I shall contest every payment made for your brother's support. I shall send copies of my objection to every trustee and every gentleman whose good opinion may one day be required on his behalf. His name will be made to carry the dispute you created." The threat struck where Quentin intended. Not at her comfort, but at the future of the one person she had entered the marriage to protect. Millicent felt the key press into her palm. She did not loosen her grasp. "The trust is beyond your authority," she said. "You may write as many letters as your pride requires. Tomorrow at 10 you may hear why none of them will alter my decision." Quentin's color rose. He collected the portfolio and left because Norton opened the outer door himself and said nothing more. That evening, Millicent arranged the library table. The current articles lay before the head chair bound by the same blue ribbon she had tied on her wedding morning. The West Key rested beside them. The household register remained closed until a witness should open it. Norton entered only far enough to see the places. "You are seated there," she said, pointing to the chair at her right. He looked at the head of the table, then at her. "And I speak after you have ruled." "Yes." "Done." He left her with the room still arranged by her hand. At 10 the next morning, the library doors closed upon the council. Millicent sat at the head of the mahogany table. Norton sat to her right, not quite beside her, and not above her. Quentin and the solicitor occupied the far side. The steward and the housekeeper stood near the shelves as witnesses. Quentin opened the old articles first. The name Lucinda Brandon appeared on the unsigned line. This was the intended alliance, he said. Your marriage occurred under emergency pressure. Miss Brandon has returned. Millicent may retire with a cottage and an allowance, and the proper arrangement can proceed. Millicent looked at the paper but did not touch it. An unsigned intention is not a marriage. The family gave its word. The bride did not. Quentin laid Lucinda's letter beside the old settlement. She regrets her folly. Society will understand that you stood in temporarily to prevent scandal. Millicent untied the blue ribbon around the present articles. The silk whispered across the table. This document bears my signature and His Grace's. It settles the fund to my separate use. My brother's allowance is paid from it, and no Chetwood trustee may alter it without my written consent. She turned one page. My jointure does not depend upon the birth of a child. My room's correspondence and household access are secured. At the end of one season, I may leave with those rights intact. Quentin leaned back. Technical language cannot change the truth. You were a convenient substitute. Millicent placed one finger beside her name. Lucinda had the right to refuse the marriage chosen for her. Her return does not give her the right to take the marriage I chose to enter. She may receive money, shelter, and whatever kindness her relations owe her. She does not receive my name, my rooms, or the authority I have exercised in this house. She felt Norton's stillness at her right. He did not intervene. I am not here because a wedding gown stood empty. Millicent continued. I am here because I read these terms, changed them, and signed my own name. This household has altered when I spoke. That is the only arrangement I will recognize. Quentin's face hardened. And after the season, will you hide behind a temporary clause forever? Millicent folded her hands on the table. I choose to remain through the season already agreed. I will decide what follows when the season ends. That decision belongs to me, and it will not be purchased by poverty scandal or fear for my brother. She turned to Norton. The present articles stand. Lucinda may be received only at my invitation. Mr. Chetwood has no further authority over my trust, my correspondence, or this household. That is my ruling. Norton rose. He did not repeat her reasons. He pulled the bell cord once. The butler entered, and the household witnesses opened the register. Record this, Norton said. Millicent, Duchess of Crestwood, holds authority over the West Suite. The West Dining Room, the household accounts placed in her charge, and access granted through this house. Miss Brandon is a caller and is admitted only by the Duchess's instruction. He looked at Quentin. Your access to Crestwood papers ends today. No letter from you is to be placed before my wife unless she chooses to receive it. Any attempt to disturb her trust will be answered by my solicitors. I shall not recommend your appointments, underwrite your notes, or receive another petition from your connection. Quentin glanced toward the solicitor, but the man had already lowered his eyes to the executed articles. You would rupture two families for this? Quentin asked. Norton's answer was brief. You did that when you tried to erase my wife. Quentin made one last attempt. And the boy. You cannot silence every whisper about the source of his allowance. Millicent answered before Norton could move. No. But I can teach my brother that a whisper is not authority, and that no man may buy his obedience by threatening his name. The solicitor looked toward the current articles. The separate use settlement is valid. Mr. Chetwood has no power to suspend payment. The final support beneath Quentin's threat disappeared. He gathered his papers. The old unsigned articles went back into the portfolio. Lucinda's letter remained on the table until Millicent folded it and returned it to him. She should have it back, Millicent said. It is her explanation, not my evidence. Quentin accepted the letter because there was nothing else left to claim. The doors closed behind him. The steward entered Millicent's ruling in the household register. The housekeeper added the date. Then both bowed to Millicent first. The housekeeper's bow was deeper than it had been on the wedding night. Only then did they withdraw. Norton remained at the table. "The ruling is enforced," he said. Millicent retied the blue ribbon around the present articles. Her hands were steady now. "Yes." He did not approach her. He remained beside the chair she had assigned him while she gathered the key and left the library. In the corridor, the brass had gone cold against her palm. Its chill pressed into the heat of her skin as though the key still expected to be used as a defense. She could keep it there for the rest of the season. She could keep every term intact, keep the West Suite closed, and leave in spring with nothing taken from her. That safety was real. It had been hard won. Opening a door did not require surrendering the key. Yet some older part of her still believed that once she invited another person inside the room would cease to be hers. She stopped halfway to the west dining room. Behind her, no footsteps followed. Norton did not turn her ruling into a claim upon the next moment. He stayed where she had left him. The choice was still entirely hers. Millicent went on. She found him 10 minutes later in the west dining room, standing beside the chair he had occupied 3 nights before. He had left the council papers in the library and brought no instructions with him. Millicent placed the brass key on the table between them. Her fingers remained upon it for one breath before she let go. "On our wedding day you said you would not allow an arrangement to erase me," she said. "Today you allowed my decision to alter your command. That is why the words have become true." Norton looked at the key, then at her. "Will you have me remain for dinner?" She could have answered with the season's clause. She could have named another condition, another hour, another door. Instead, she drew the chair beside hers away from the table. "I will." He came nearer, but she closed the final distance. Her fingers caught the edges of his cravat and held him there. "This is also an invitation," she said. Then she kissed him. For one heartbeat, Norton did not move. After that, the restraint she had seen in every doorway and every measured touch gave way. His hands framed her face warm and careful, despite the force of his answer. The kiss deepened without hurry, as though neither of them meant to surrender the choice that had brought them to it. When they parted, his forehead rested briefly against hers. "You hold the key?" he said. Millicent glanced at the brass lying openly on the table. "I know." One season later, Atis spring warmed the glass of the winter garden. The orange tree had put out new leaves in the southeast corner. The West Suite remained Millicent's. Her name now stood in the household register. Her brother's allowance arrived from the separate fund without Quentin's hand upon it, and no room was opened or closed on her behalf without her knowledge. Lucinda's name still belonged to Lucinda. It no longer hovered above Millicent's place or waited upon an empty chair. That evening, the small west dining room held a family supper of Millicent's choosing. Her younger brother sat near the window. 2 of Norton's kinder relations occupied the opposite side, both now capable of speaking Millicent's name without glancing toward the past. There was laughter over the orange tree, disagreement over the proper number of candles, and no empty chair kept for anyone absent. Millicent's brother asked her a question about his allowance directly, and without first looking toward Norton or any older relation. Norton had nevertheless sent the steward a seating order that morning. It placed him across from Millicent with ducal exactness. She allowed the arrangement to survive until the guests had gone. When the last carriage departed, Norton returned from seeing them to the hall and stopped at the dining room door. Millicent had moved his chair. It no longer stood across the table. She had drawn it beside hers close enough that their sleeves would touch. The old blue ribbon was tied around his folded napkin. The brass key rested between their plates, no longer hidden in her palm. Norton examined the altered place. "I assume this is a ruling, Your Grace. An invitation. For this evening. For the next season." She rested one hand on the chair back. "And unless you develop a dangerous attachment to central orange trees for the seasons after that." His expression warmed with the dry amusement she had learned to recognize. "I shall restrict my errors to furniture." That is a larger field than you suppose. He covered her hand with his. You will keep the West Suite. Yes. And the key. Yes. Norton drew the chair the final inch toward hers and sat where she had placed him. Crestwood has enough doors for belonging and for choice. Millicent took her seat beside him. Their shoulders touched. The ribbon lay loose against the white linen, and the key remained on the table where neither of them needed to defend it. The house had made room for memory, for laughter, and for the man she had chosen to invite nearer. But it answered first, and without hesitation, to her name: the end.